Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jack and Joe Show. The sun is continuing to beam down, and it's a really happy time to be in the English weather, Jack, but also to be a Fulham fan because we got back to winning ways on Sunday in what was probably one of our favourite games of the season, I think it's fair to say. How are you doing?
Yeah, it was never in doubt, was it? The narrative of thing is, I didn't even think about the Sessegnon narrative until Sessegnon sort of came on, or at least I saw the team sheet and saw he was on the bench. It went from one of the dullest games and a little nothing y sort of game to one of the most special of the season in the space of about 5-10 minutes, and that was really really special. Joe, absolutely fantastic to be back in the European spots now, eighth place, and a lot to play for, and it's going to be such an exciting end to the season now.
Yeah, absolutely. Results went our way this weekend outside of Fulham as well. Obviously, the Man City Brighton game ending in a draw helped us out, get them both down there. Newcastle obviously didn't play because they were in the cup. And then we also obviously Villa didn't play because they were going to play one of the teams that are in the cup. And then we've obviously got a defeat for Bournemouth
Hmm.
against our neighbours Brentford, which actually I think helped us out a fair bit. So it's good that we could leapfrog both of those teams. We played the same amount of games as Bournemouth and Aston Villa, but we're above them both. It's worth noting because Villa had a game played a few weeks back that was their basically game not in hand, essentially.
Mm.
But yeah, really good feeling. I mean, Jack, I completely agree with you. The game was awful for the first 70 minutes, and it seemed to all completely change for me when Willian shot wide. And it was almost like until that point, it was a non event. And then Fulham realised we could win this. And a couple of minutes later, it was 1-0, and the rest is history. It was a weird performance because first half, I thought we were well in control without creating too many chances. You know, Spurs were really, really unthreatening. They looked a little bit choppy defensively. You know, they weren't all there. We didn't create much, but it felt like if anyone was going to nick a goal, it was us. And then second half, they brought on a few subs. You know, they brought on Son, they brought on Madison. They tried to change up the defence a little bit and move Gray into midfield. And they had started to get a bit of control in the game and probably created the best chance of the game, which fell to Solanke. But like I said, that momentum swing, especially when Romero went off and we
Mm.
brought on Muniz and basically just said, okay, we're going to absolutely bombard you aerially and you're not going to be able to deal with it. It was a masterstroke by Silva. It was great play from our forward line. And ultimately, from then, I think there was only one winner.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I was so discouraged by the second half performance. I was thinking with Madison and Son all coming on, and Bergvall, I was like, they are in the ascendancy. They are a team who are looking more likely to get a goal. Solanke missing a really, really big chance, but it fell to him fairly quickly, and he couldn't quite make the most of it. And what you're absolutely right. In fact, I put it to Silva after the game, and I said it feels like the game changed with that Willian shot on target to G up the crowd. But it was also a little bit before that when I think it was Muniz who won a header and flicked it on to
Yes.
someone. I think it might be on Traore, and then suddenly it was even before the Willian shot. It was Pereira's cross, which caused Vicario to come out of his goal and punch it away. And that was the first real sort of time we've tested the keeper in the second half, at least. Fell to Willian, classic Willian shot, who, by the way, had a great game, I believe. And it was interesting that we took Iwobi off before Willian. I was thinking Willian was only going to play about 60 minutes. Willian shoots wide, and I'm thinking, okay, here we go. Come on, let's actually push on here. And Jimenez, it was interesting because I thought Jimenez had a fairly decent game, but Muniz came on and was like a man possessed, like unbelievable work rate and willingness to win headers and to bully those Spurs defenders. And then, of course, the goal. It's so interesting because if you watch that Robinson cross, it's identical to the cross that found Harry Wilson that headed in for Brentford. Absolutely identical cross. This time it fell to Traore after I think the Spurs player got a touch, and it was all a bit messy, but then it managed to fall to Pereira, and he lays it off to Muniz, and it's such a sweet finish. Like no power on the shot at all, just into the far corner. Um, and at 1-0, I was thinking, God, if we could nick this now and beat Spurs, this is fantastic. And then the moment of magic happens. Joe, I just want to know from your position, because it felt as if the roar from the crowd was just that slight bit. It just had a bit more to it when Sessegnon scored. I definitely got out of my seat from where I was positioned, and I was actually sat next to a Spurs fan who was just he was sat in the press box, sort of doing nothing all game. He wasn't like working. He was on his phone a lot, like texting, and he was like, he was basically lamenting the Spurs performance every time they lost the ball. I wasn't trying to wind him up by over celebrating. I was just absolutely delighted in the moment that Sessegnon scored. But from your position in the Hammersmith end, that must have been really special.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people have said it online. I'm sort of repeating old ground, but like it's been a season where there's been a lot of sort of special moments. Muniz versus Chelsea, the Wilson brace against Brentford, just to name a couple. The penalties at Old Trafford, obviously, but in terms of a one-off goal, this was right up there. I mean, yeah, the roar was far more than it was for Muniz's goal, which did, the roof came off the place. It was good atmosphere at that point in the Hammersmith end for sure. But the Sessegnon goal, it was like as soon as he got it onto his right foot, which is something I'm not familiar with saying. He thought, just hit it. And what a finish it was. It was just one of those great moments. And he did so well to shrug off Davis because, look, Ben Davis is not a natural centre-back. I think you could tell that from his performance. He's not the biggest or strongest player. But let's face it, neither is Sessegnon. But what Sessegnon is a fantastic goal scorer. So as soon as he managed to shrug him off, there was no doubt in my mind that at the bare minimum, there's a shot going on target here. And it was a wonderful moment. I've got to admit, I wish he celebrated. I'm not going to hold it against him at all because, he did play for Tottenham, but I'd have loved to see a bit of release. But ultimately, you could see what it meant to him in the footage after the game. And standing up to the crowd, he seemed a bit emotional. And it was just a fantastic moment. And he's given Marco Silva a headache now in terms of, we'll speak about going on to the Palace game and beyond that. But he is giving a headache to Marco Silva in terms of, he's one of the best goal scorers we've got in the squad, not necessarily in terms of volume, but when a chance falls to him, I wouldn't say there's many people in the squad that I would rather that chance fall to. And at the moment, he's probably right up there with someone like Jimenez or Muniz, I mean, probably even above them, I would say, in terms of clinical nature. Great to have another option. Great that Silva's starting to see him a little bit more as a forward-thinking player. You've typed up your quotes, Jack, and he's basically said how much he rates his versatility, which is true. When we go to the 5 at the back system, he fits the left wing-back role really well. Yeah. But we've always sort of maintained that in his best position, he would be on the wing. So it's great that we've got a bit more cover up there now and a bit more quality when it comes to actually delivering the final bit, whether that's the cross, which he's done a few good ones this season, got a couple of assists in the cups, or whether that is the finishing touch of a goal. But a wonderful moment. Also love the fact that we mixed it up a bit on Sunday. Leno went long, especially when Muniz came on a few times, and it almost showed a plan B that we don't always see when we're chasing a game. But I thought that our game management from the moment Romero went off, and we basically realised there's a physical presence lacking in their defence now, and we changed our tactics and basically decided to physically bombard them, aerially bombard them. It really, really worked. I don't think Ange had an answer to it. Their game plan the second half had basically been to keep the ball more, have a bit more control, get players on that are a little bit more dangerous in that final third. Maddison, Bergvall, like you mentioned, he was quite good at driving them forward at times. And it was working. They were wrestling control of the game, but I think that we wrestled it back by turning it into a game they didn't want to have, which was basically, if the ball's in the air, who's going to win it? Who's going to win the first ball, second ball? Who's going to get the cross in the box? And it was Fulham time and time again. And, even after we went 2-0 up, it's almost gone under the radar. There's no highlights of it, but it was all Fulham again. Robinson beat 2 men brilliantly, running down the left wing and added time. There was a header by Muniz that went straight at Vicario. But, we could have nicked a third goal, and it would have been a year to the day that we beat them 3-0 all over again, which is fantastic. But this performance gave me a lot of confidence, Jack, in terms of winning when not at our best, but also showing a reaction and changing the game plan midway through. We were here last week talking about the inverse of that at Brighton, at how the subs didn't really have the effect we wanted. We seemed to be stuck between settling for a point and going for the win. There was no doubt in my mind what the attitude was from Silva and the team on Sunday. It was very much, this is a game we have to win. And we played like we wanted to win more than Tottenham did, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I almost felt that not celebrating the goal made it look better from Sessegnon, because he pulls off a worldie and just sort of just stands there and embraces in the moment. I mean, with a celebration, and then Muniz basically does a celebration for him by leapfrogging him and jumping about 1,000,000 feet into the air. I mean, that was sensational. Some incredible photos that came from that celebration and from the reaction to that goal. For me, it was well up there as one of my highlights of the season. And Sessegnon scoring was always going to happen at some point, and the circumstances of which he did it was probably for me the most perfect script. You could have said, to take us to Wembley in an FA Cup quarter final, and of course that would have been great. But given everything that happened while he was at Spurs, to seal the win against Spurs, against Ben Davies like that, was truly remarkable. Now we've got an interesting debate which we can talk about, because Lukic's 2-game ban is up, thank goodness. He surely comes back in, and if someone said who's impressed more, Pereira or Smith Rowe while he's been away, I have to say Pereira on Sunday was absolutely fabulous. Smith Rowe, for me, we spoke about him a lot this season, just too lightweight on the ball on Sunday. A little bit safe. Whenever he receives the ball, it's not for him to receive it on the half turn and then, unless he's in acres of space, he was against Everton where he drove forward and set up Iwobi's goal. But he finds himself in tight areas, which is difficult to then progress. And it's always playing the safe pass, either backwards or sideways. And I'm not saying that Pereira does that better, but I'm just saying for a number 10 going forward, if Lukic was to come back in the team, which I would want to happen alongside Berger, for me, Pereira would start the next game going forward. Smith Rowe, again, showing promise, scoring at Leicester, but just not quite pushing on in the way we thought he might. And it's just incredibly frustrating. As much as I wish him the best, I want him to do wonderful things with this club, and I still think he can. Right now, if you've got a situation between Pereira and Smith Rowe, Joe, for me, it's Pereira at the moment. What would you think?
I agree. I remember we spoke on here after the Forest game where Smith Rowe put in, without a doubt, his performance of the season. He was absolutely brilliant. He was electric. He was everywhere. He was taking risks. He scored a goal, and he looked really dangerous. And he was leading everything positive going forward. And we discussed whether he'd been the level we expected, whether it'd be underwhelming. And the reason that I said at the time overall underwhelming is because we didn't see that level of performance enough. I haven't been anywhere near, neither of you, as hard on him as some others. I understand why they are, because in terms of the record signing nature of this player, we're not a club that spends that sort of money regularly. We're expecting that sort of level of performance every game, or at least more often than not. He's just hiding a little bit at the moment. He's playing the safe pass, like you say, and I do think that Pereira takes more risks, and that can be incredibly frustrating as well. Sometimes there's times where he tries things and they don't come off, but ultimately, if you play like that over the course of the season, you will create more than if you just play the safe option every time. And we saw that he got an assist. He's been really good last few weeks, in my opinion. He's been putting in a good shift defensively as well, and I think it means that the midfield decision for Crystal Palace, hoping, touching wood, assuming everything that there's no sort of injuries or any sort of notable things that happen over the international break, that it would be Sander Berger, Sasha Lukic, and I think Andreas Pereira. There's other interesting avenues within this team to discuss, though, because obviously up front, we've now got a few more options, not just in terms of the striker position, but on the wings. I think that, weirdly, Adama Traore, Rodrigo Muniz, and Sessegnon probably all deserve a start. I would say they probably all deserve a start in terms of what they offered, but I think they're all better coming off the bench. So I'm really torn on it, because I think that Jimenez had a good game in his hold-up play. I think that Jimenez is better from the start and Muniz coming off the bench, rather than when Muniz starts. I'm normally sometimes a little bit underwhelmed by his overall gameplay. I think he's better coming on and battering sort of tired defenders, whereas that's not really Jimenez's game. I think the same for Sessegnon. I'd probably rather Willian start on the left, or Iwobi, and Adama on the right. I like him a bit where there's a little bit more space towards the end of the game. Another added problem, it's a good problem to have because we've got a lot of options, not a bad problem, is that I much prefer Iwobi on the left than the right. Yeah. And you can obviously only start one of him and Willian, or Sessegnon, but him and Willian being more realistic. I agree with you that I liked Willian's performance on the weekend. I probably liked it more than Iwobi's. So if I was going to make one change to the front line against Crystal Palace, I would probably be starting Adama Traore on the right and leaving the rest the same. And the reason for that is that I think that Willian is better off the left. I think that you've then got two options or three for bringing on Iwobi in the match, either replacing Andreas Pereira in the 10, replacing Willian on the left, replacing Traore on the right. There's a lot of flexibility there. And I think that I'd be really interested to see Adama get a start. But there's so many options. I'm sure my opinion will change tenfold by the time this video even goes up because it's really hard to judge. But Silva's got a few headaches for sure, and there's going to be one at right back soon as well. You know, Tete's nearly back supposedly. We don't know whether he'll be ready to start against Palace, but supposedly he could even be in the squad. That might be too soon. It might be the Arsenal game a few days later. But Jack, what's your opinion on the sort of front three in particular in terms of as of right now? And we're going to speak again next week. Your opinion might change. More news might come in. But if you were lining up against Palace right now, what would the starting front three be for you?
I think it's worth noting that if you're not selected to start and you're on the bench, it's just as much a compliment as starting, because Silva will call on you at some point. And in an FA Cup game where it could go to extra time and penalties, and there's another 30 minutes, your services off the bench would be even more important. I agree with you. I think Iwobi looks knackered, in my opinion. He looks knackered. And to be brought off at that early in the game, I think there's something to be said that he's played so many minutes over the last few games, or over the season, really. And I think it's best that he does rest. I agree. I don't. As much as I liked the way we played in the first half, it's either one of Willian or Iwobi on the left hand side for me. I think that Adama Traore is great off the bench, like you say, but would give us, and he started so many games this season as well, and give us attacking impetus from the word go. Ipswich away, Manchester United away on the opening night of the season spring to mind. Yeah, if I had to be hard pushed right now, I would start. I think I would start Iwobi and Adama, and then Jimenez. And the reason I wouldn't start Muniz is because I just like him off the bench. I think I've said this before. I feel more encouraged bringing Muniz off the bench, knowing that he could make an impact than Jimenez coming off the bench and making an impact. I know that's sort of outcome bias because we haven't really seen Jimenez come off the bench and score, although he should have at Wolves a couple of times. But that for me would be the way to go. I was very encouraged with Willian. You know, I saw him start when I saw the team sheet. I was thinking, okay, so it kind of makes sense. You know, it's backing up what Silva said. He needed 3 or 4 weeks to gain some fitness before he can start games. Let's see what he can do. One thing I saw when I saw the Willian starting was, well, is that the best option if you want to expose a high line in Tottenham and playing a winger in Willian who is pretty much behind the pace a little bit? But it was okay. It didn't prove to be a detriment to us. And actually, when we brought off the subs, they made the difference from the bench as well with Adama and Sessegnon. So that's what I'd go with, Joe, at the moment. Because we want to dedicate next week's episode all about the Crystal Palace game. But there is something else we talk about before we go, and that is an article that very timely, of course, came out yesterday from John Percy and Matt Law together. That's always going to make me nervous because they're very reputable journalists, and they basically said, you know, Iraola and Silva are the targets if Ange Postecoglou was to get sacked. Now, from face value, I don't think Ange Postecoglou will be sacked unless Spurs crash out of Europe, as in before the end of the season, unless they crash out of Europe before they get to the final, or at least if they get to a semi, it's fairly acceptable. But if they were to lose in the quarterfinal, I reckon that could be that. They could also obviously wait till the summer to make a change. And obviously what makes me nervous is, Joe, is I haven't read the article because I don't have access to it, but someone has sent me a quote saying that sources believe that Silva and the club may have a parting of the ways in the summer. But also there's a case that says Iraola is interested in the project at Spurs. from what I see, and I've already spoke about this at length, is that I think that the Fulham project and the Bournemouth project are probably more exciting, more tantalising right now than that of Tottenham. That's just me being a little bit biased. Obviously, Spurs have a brand new stadium, brand newish stadium, incredible facilities at their training ground. Obviously, money to spend, more money to spend, but of course the pressure is more scrutinised. Joe, I'm worried, of course, but I don't want this to cloud the rest of the season. We should just focus on what's on the pitch, what's coming up for Fulham on the pitch, because that is incredibly important. I don't think Silva will even have this in his mind either going forward, Joe.
Yeah, I agree. And also, there's a few things in the article, like you don't have the subscription, read the screenshots. So hopefully they're not fake, because I'm talking about an article that I haven't read. But ultimately, the article doesn't quite make sense to me in terms of it says that Bournemouth will fight to keep Iraola, but it doesn't mention anything about Fulham, as if we wouldn't fight to keep Silva. It's like, of course we will. And the article makes it sound like Iraola is the first choice. It sounds like there's other names as well. Ultimately, I do think that Silva will one day leave us to try and go to a club that he thinks are the next step up. Are Tottenham that right this second? No. Are they long term? Probably yes. They are probably going to be in contention for Europe far more often than not. They've got bigger facilities, higher budget, etc. But right this second, I think that what we need to focus on is trying our best to get into Europe. And I think that's our best hope of hanging on to Marco Silva. And, like you say, Jack, it's not an absolute given that Ange will be sacked anyway.
Yeah.
I think this is just them putting the feelers out. There's a few things that didn't make sense to me. Sources suggesting that there might be a parting of the ways, but there's not really anything to back it up concretely.
Yeah.
There's all chance that there could be a parting of the ways if a better opportunity came up. I don't necessarily think that's what this opportunity is right now for Marco Silva, and I don't think that this will be in his mind at all for the next few months.
Yeah. Just looking at the list of players going on international duty. Joachim Andersen, of course, with Denmark, Calvin Bassey, Nigeria, as is Alex Iwobi, Sander Berge with Norway, Castagna with Belgium, Jimenez with Mexico, and Lukic with Serbia, Josh King with England, and Amissa and Brodie Dare with Scotland, Amissa with England, and Seth Ridgen with England in terms of youth academies as well. Let's hope and pray that there's no injuries. Oh, it doesn't say Anthony Robinson. That's interesting. I would assume he's been called up, but the article from the club does not say Anthony Robinson, although they've got maybe they've just missed him out because they've got a huge semi-final in the Nations League in the US. They're playing Panama. And of course, my point being is what I've said a few times now to people. I was speaking to someone at the club the other day about would Silva pull the plug on players like Jimenez and players like Robinson going to international duty because they know that they will arrive so close into that Palace game where there's almost hardly any prep ever. I always reference that game against Blackpool. I remember Ream and Robinson coming back on the Friday and then both played and we lost the game to Blackpool in Silva's first ever defeat at Fulham. So maybe I'd be very, very surprised if Silva... In fact, I think they might have deleted the tweet. No, they haven't. Find out who's in action this international break and Robinson's just not on the list. Did he not make the squad? I'd be very surprised if he didn't, Joe.
I mean, good news for us if he has. I must admit, I don't know. But yeah, there's a few interesting ones in terms of, Andreas Pereira potentially coming back late. Palace are in the exact same position in terms of players like Daniel Munoz, for example. I think will be one of the latest players that plays for them. Obviously very key to their system as the right wing back and scored against us the other week. Really interesting. Just hoping for no injury news really. We obviously had the October bad news about Lukic. So hopefully we've sort of got our bad luck out of the way. Touch wood, I hope so. But it'd be great to have as much of a fully fit squad as possible. If Tete's back as it stands, it just means that we're missing Harry Wilson and Reece Nelson. Hopefully the former can be back at some point before the end of the season, because it's been a while now already since he trudged off against Man United. But super excited about that game and looking forward to speaking about it in more detail next week, because it really does have that makes or breaks our season in terms of, regardless of what happens in the race for Europe, a Wembley trip would be phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. Joe, I have just seen that we've been sent a tweet earlier saying Fulham are ready to open talks with Tottenham Hotspur managerial target Marco Silva over a new contract.
Yes.
The source isn't great, but I would be very surprised if that wasn't the case anyway, given he's only got 1 year left on his contract. I just feel as though I'm not sure what the end goal of the project is for Marco Silva, and it's obvious to say, oh, get us into Europe, but then what? What can we do from there? And if anything, if we get into Europe, it opens up a whole can of worms of possibilities, a good can of worms of what can happen in terms of players you can attract to the club. Then you can go on that European journey. It's the fact we're sat here talking about it is incredibly exciting. I desperately want Fulham to be one of those clubs who you watch on a Thursday evening, and while you're having your tea, obviously not while we're having your tea, I want to be out there, watching them in the flesh, and I'm sure many of Fulham fans will feel the same way. And then having those really special, I was about to say 3, it would be I can't remember now, like 4 at least 4 home games. The group stages, they've changed the whole format, haven't they? And I think it'd be something like 4 home games. I can't even remember how it works now. Anyway, Joe, I think that's probably that for today. I don't think there's anything else to talk about unless you have any more opinions of the Spurs game.
No, I don't think so. It was just one of those where it's very nice to win when not at your best. Really important win to take us back to 8th, because we just need to be there or thereabouts in that race for Europe after this next run of tough games. So it was massively important that we won one of the more winnable fixtures in Tottenham. So obviously we've got to go to Arsenal next, and then we've got Liverpool. We've got to go to Bournemouth. We've got Chelsea and the West London derby. It's just, there's a few things in a row where, Fulham could play at their best and lose some of those games just based on the quality of the opposition. So it was important to make sure that we've just got those points in the bank, ready for that tough run of games. And so exciting. It means even more when you win those games in terms of going to Bournemouth or going to Villa, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, whoever, because you're also taking points off rivals for those spots. So it's a real challenge, but it's a real opportunity as well.
I'll be honest with you. When we lost to, I predicted us to beat Spurs, and we did. But when we lost to Brighton, I was actually fearing the worst in terms of what could have happened against Spurs, and subsequently a terrible international break where you're feeling so low, and then you're going into a Palace game off the back of a couple of defeats, and then that really tricky run of fixture. So I cannot even begin to explain how huge that win against Spurs was, and is. And still is, and everyone's still riding the crest of the wave of what it was. I would argue it was the best black and white Sunday win of a team that plays in black and white. The most famous, the most celebrated. I can't think of another team who plays in black and white that celebrated a win. In all seriousness, I was saying to you how much I don't want Newcastle to win the cup. But that was before Fulham, because I was in a very doom and gloom sort of mood, and then we beat Spurs, and I was actually fairly happy for Newcastle. And Joe, that actually could help Fulham in helping in qualifying for Europe. The fact that Newcastle have won the cup, I think we'd need them to finish in the top 7 play. The whole thing is incredibly complicated. If we got into it now, I think we'd be here till midnight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really confusing as well, to the point where when the FA Cup final is, it's scheduled for the week that we go to Brentford as it stands. So let's say, for example, we got in to the FA Cup final, just for the sake of this. Let's say that we weren't successful. Let's say we had a nightmare in the final. Let's say we lost. Depending on who beats us, that could mean that the Man City game is huge, final day of the season, or completely irrelevant because the spots have almost already been ironed out. It's so confusing. It's really confusing. The Newcastle win, I think, is a positive thing overall in terms of the race for Europe and our chances. I think that Newcastle will most likely be one of the teams that do finish above us, looking at their fixtures, looking at some of their recent form in terms of some of the bigger games that they've had to win, like when they played Forest, like the Liverpool Cup game, like going to West Ham on the Monday night and not playing well and getting a result, a little bit like we did against Tottenham, just being clinical and taking chances. So it's a crazy, crazy race, because every team now, you have to even include Brentford in it. I don't think they will, based on the fixtures they've got left and based on the gap they currently have. But Brentford are technically in the race. And you would say that when Crystal Palace inevitably win that game against Southampton, you would say, just based on what Southampton play like. They've got hard fixtures, but they'd be in it as well. So, you've got teams going quite far down the league and thinking they've still got a chance. I think it's a great thing, but let's make sure that Fulham are on the right side of it.
Imagine we beat Man City in the FA Cup final and then play them where it's almost irrelevant and still beat them. I was trying to think of all the scenarios where we could play Brentford and beat them to qualify for Europe. There's so many different combinations that could happen. And don't discount Brentford. I mean, that was an important win they got against Bournemouth, and I think that they could be very much in it. But it'd be nice to beat them on whenever we play them, to knock them out of that race. That would be hilarious. Given the dreadful game at 0-0 at Brentford last season, that was genuinely terrible. Okay, as usual, we've gone on for longer than we thought. Joe, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure, Jack. Thanks everyone for watching, and catch you next week. Enjoy the international break if you can.
Yes, and a huge yelp from Joe's dog as he's very much gearing up for the FA Cup quarter final. There is some more needle than usual between Fulham and Palace fans. And I'd love to explore that a little bit more next week with you, Joe Sansom in particular. Thanks so much for watching, and we will speak next week. Enjoy the international break, and come on, Fulham.